Because I cannot be a co-host. And I'll introduce you.
Okay. Oh, I see now where it shows me a number of participants.
Yeah, I can see some stuff as a panelist.
Should put my glasses on so I can look smart.
Okay, so yeah, this is on webinar, so it's not going to show me. Okay, I get it now.
And I think we'll start like, let's start 4 past the hour, just because wherever you are, because I think people are from there.
Okay, and I'm also going to open it up to general questions about physics education research at the end. So you prepared for that? I can help you, but I know I don't know about some of the other fields. So maybe if someone wants to know a little bit more about some of the other work, you can help them with that.
Yeah, and I think once we get, if we have time at the end, I don't know what your day is like, Camille, and I don't want to keep you, but we'll stop recording in case people have questions about PER stuff that maybe they don't want recorded.
Okay. So.
That was interesting, actually. A talk I gave recently, people asked questions they didn't want to be like broadcast to everybody. Time.
I get lots of questions about, I'm going to talk about it just very briefly on one of the slides, just because I get lots of questions about my research and its relation to PR overall. So I'll kind of answer that off top.
Cool. Steven, if you're talking to us, you're muted.
Oh, my bad. Camille, can you make it so that people can chat with each other?
Let's see if I can do that. It says show chat preview. Okay, so when I click chat, I see Q&A is open, right? Mm-hmm. I see where answer questions only. Okay, now I did see where you can have attendees to view and comment on other questions. But as far as chat, the only capability I have is to show chat previews. That's the only thing it gives me.
I'm not sure to fix it on my end. I think we should get started though. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for signing up and attending this. And if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for watching the recording. This is the first ever virtual seminar for the PER technical section of the National Society of Black Physicists, NSBP. Thank you so much for NSBP for helping with this, particularly our president, Stephen Robertson, who's right here. But you are not here to listen to me. I'm Alexis Knob. I am one of the co-leads for the PER technical section. And it is my privilege to announce and introduce Camille Coffie, who will be speaking to us about her research. Take it away, Camille.
Hello. Before I pull up my presentations, I'll just give you a little information about myself. Again, my name is Camille Coffie. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Central Florida. I am working with Dr. Jackie Tinney in the Physics Education Research Group. Additionally, I teach some introductory physics lectures at Spelman College in Atlanta, which is my alma mater, and I am going to go ahead and begin to share the slides now. Okay. So I know that when most of you signed up and it was titled Journey to a PhD Through the Lens of Black Women in Physics. And you are at the correct place. That is the overarching project that my dissertation work is stemmed from. So there was a call for the APS Innovation Fund. We're looking for proposals to do research related to physics and topics in physics that we could bring to the forefront with some innovative methods. At that time, my advisor and I worked together to create a proposal, and that proposal is the Journey to a PhD Through the Lens of Black Women in Physics. We were awarded the APS Innovation Fund Award for that, and that is the sponsor of this research. From that research, I have also been working on my personal dissertation study, which is using a lot of the data from the bigger project, the larger project. And the title of it is Examining How Pejorative Stereotypes About Black Women Shape Their Experiences in Physics PhD Programs. Again, I'm working with Dr. Jackie Tinney at the University of Central Florida, who's an associate professor in the Department of Physics. We're also working collaboratively with Dr. Trenton Marsh, who is in the College of Innovation and Education, and a recent UCF graduate, Dr. Atunu Isalami, who is now a professor in Northern Iowa. So of course, we always have to start giving some statistical data as to why this work is really important. I think many of you are familiar with drastic underrepresentation of people of color in general, but specifically for Black women in physics. As of recently, there hasn't been any updated information that I am aware of giving the actual number of Black women who have obtained their PhDs in physics. But as of 2019, there were fewer than 100 Black women. Dr. Jamie Valentine Miller keeps up with these numbers and these women on the African American Women in Physics website. You can log in there at aawip.com. And what we do know is now that number has increased. However, it's still a lot of work to do in increasing those numbers. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see where I believe in 2019, we only had one Black woman to obtain a PhD in physics. We had 8 Black men, so they were outperforming us or achieving PhDs by 8 times, which is a lot comparatively to other STEM fields where Black women, on the other hand, are outperforming men. We also have less than 1% of the PhDs earned in physics are earned by Black women. So we're doing this work because we really want to encourage physics departments to be more welcoming and supportive of Black women so that we can see those numbers increase. We also want to just create an inclusive environment, an environment where there's a sense of belonging for Black women so that we can retain them in these programs. Before I go any further, I kind of just wanted to give a little information about physics education research, because oftentimes I'm asked, especially by other physicists, what does this have to do with physics? How does this relate to physics education? So physics education is really anything that has to do with improving the teaching and learning of physics. We use different tools and methods to answer questions about how students acquire knowledge and how they best learn. And it's a way that we can kind of garner if your teaching strategies, if your program is being effective in allowing students to master the content that they need to further their careers. One of the things, though, that people are not aware of is that initially, physics education research did start out to be primarily focused on curriculum development, instructional strategies, misconceptions students have about different physics phenomena. But as time has gone on, we are broadening physics education research, and we're looking at understanding some of the cognitive mechanisms that can either prevent or enhance the learning for students. Um, what I like to tell people is it really doesn't matter how elaborate your lecture is, how innovative your laboratory assignments are. If students are not able to access the information, if they don't feel included in the course, the teaching is going to be less effective. So before we can even think about improving the numbers for underrepresented groups in physics, before we even think about the curriculum and the content and the lab assignments that we need to improve physics, we have to think about the culture, the climate, and the environment that the students are entering, because we want those students to be prepared. We want those students to feel welcomed and like they have the ability to come into the physics classroom and engage and present their best selves. So again, just a little bit on the purpose of the study outside of wanting to improve the numbers for physics. We also have to look at, really taking some time to elevate the voices of Black women in these programs. There is a lot of current research. Dr. Camille Rosa and others have done studies focused on Black women pursuing physics degrees. And there are even a couple that focus on PhDs as well. And what we found in those studies is that Black women in physics PhD programs are experiencing a lot of racialized and sexist experiences that are causing them undue and unjust harm. And so, as part of this study, we not only wanted to look at some of the barriers or challenges that Black women are facing in physics graduate programs, but we also wanted to start looking at ways that um, Black women can maintain their well being while going through these programs. It shouldn't have to take you being harmed, either emotionally, sometimes even physically, mentally, just to get an education, just to obtain your PhD. So we hope to compile a list of initiatives and strategies that institutions can use to help better support Black women coming through these programs. The second part of the study, in which has to do a little bit more of my dissertation work, is as I was reading a lot of the current research expressing a lot of the microaggressions, stereotype threat, imposter syndrome, all of these experiences, negative experiences that Black women are having in these programs. I had to ask myself, what is the root cause of a lot of these racialized and sexist experiences? And through my studies, I realized that a lot of it stems from the perceptions that people have of Black women. Um, we know in America, a lot of what we experience as Black people in general can be traced back to slavery and the historical context of how we were viewed and treated during those times. And I believe that some of that still comes into play today, even in academia, even in physics programs, probably more so in physics programs compared to other STEM programs, because physics tends to be predominantly associated with white men or men in general who may or may not have had the opportunity to interact or exchange with many marginalized people, especially Black women in the past. So a lot of their perceptions of Black women are based on what they see in the media or based on what they experience, in their families. And so we have to bring awareness to the fact that some of those biases and some of those stereotypes are still present and may be causing some of the challenges that Black women experience in physics PhD programs. So this is just kind of a review of what I've already stated, just some of the problems that we see But I really want to hone in on point one, where it talks about how Black women are at the intersection of race and gender. So we know that through the work of those in critical race theory, including Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined this phrase of intersectionality, that the more identities a person holds, the more susceptible they are to being harmed. So she likened it unto a crosswalk. So if you have a woman who is Black and who may hold a disability, and she is in a physics program, the likelihood of her being harmed in that program is greater than other graduate students because of all those multiple identities. She is susceptible to racism, sexism, and ableism. And so this study is not to say that we don't acknowledge that graduate school, especially physics graduate school, can be challenging for all demographics, but it's especially challenged for Black women because they do stand at that intersection. Also, we see these numbers being so low for Black women in physics, but we know that nationally, Black women do prioritize education. They have been recently named one of the most educated minority groups in America because they are obtaining degrees at a very fast rate, even faster than Black men. And we also know that in some of the STEM fields, like the biology and the biological sciences, Black women are not underrepresented, they are actually overrepresented. They're doing well. And so we have to ask ourselves the question that many of us have asked: what is it about physics that is either keeping out Black women or deterring women, Black women, from wanting to pursue it as a major and a career? And so a lot of this has to do with those racialized experiences that we talked about, but it also has a lot to do with systematic racism, and like, again, the historical backdrop that Black women have in this country. And so for just a minute, I do want to go and look at that, because in order to solve any problem, you have to go back and look at the root of that problem, right? So we know for centuries, Black women were prohibited from accessing education, including and especially fields like physics. Um, it took many years for Black women to be able to uh, obtain their education legally, and also many years for them to be able to enter higher education to pursue bachelor's, master's, or PhD degrees in any field. This is important to think about because we know that Black women have always prioritized education, so much so that during times of slavery, it is reported that Black women who worked in homes as caregivers and housekeepers would gather their slave masters' children together after school and have them teach them how to read and write. They would then leave their slave master's home and go into their community and teach others how to read and write, because they understood that education was powerful, and in their eyes, it gave them access to freedom. And so that same reality of importance that education is for Black women that existed then still exists today, as you can see by the number of Black women who are obtaining degrees, and also the number of Black women that are advocating in different fields of education, including physics education research for other Black women. And so this here is just to remind you of what the background and what the historical context is surrounding Black women and Black people in general obtaining education. And before I continue on, I just thought it was very, I'm going to say, disappointing for me, as we interviewed many of the physicists for this study, that there was a lot of parallelism I could see in some of the experiences they were having at their graduate institutions in 2023 at the time, and some of the stories of Black women who were seeking to obtain their education decades ago. So while things have changed, we still have a lot of work to do. And so for the study, we did collect a population of 13 participants. We solicited for Black women or women who identify as Black women who were currently enrolled or recently attended physics graduate programs. That second part was really important to me because a lot of the current research being done on Black women in physics graduate programs or in just physics programs, bachelor's degrees or what have you, focus a lot on the grit and resilience that they have had and all the successes that they've had. There's not a lot mentioned about how they've been harmed in these programs. And I think that's something that we need to give a voice to. Also, I really sought out participants who not only were still in their program, but who had been pushed out of their program, who had transferred to other schools because of issues or challenges with one school, or who had to master out. Because I think those are the stories that are going to tell us the most about what we need to do to help retain Black women in these programs and how we can better support them. So we have a population that represents 10 different universities, some HBCUs, historically serving institutions, and 5 PWIs. We had them from across the state, and because there's just not enough Black women pursuing PhDs in one central location, we did have to perform this study online virtually. And they are from representing all the states listed: Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. We did have the opportunity to have a diverse group. We had women who have children, some who have been married. We have some who identified with a disability prior to their enrollment in the graduate program. And then we have several who identify with a disability as a result of being in their program. And we'll talk a bit about that later. And then we had 6 who were first generational students. So in the data collection, as I told you, we sent out the request. We also, at that time, once we got their consent, sent out a demographic survey, and that's how we got the information on the previous slide. One of the methods that we chose to use for this study, which is probably unheard of in physics. I have not heard of another physics study using this method because, number one, a lot of physics research does not use qualitative research. And this is a qualitative research method. It's called Photovoice. We worked with Dr. Marsh and Dr. Ulasami to do the Photovoice method. And so I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that is. But what we do essentially is collect 10 photos. We collected 10 photos from each of the participants. And the prompt that we asked them to think about as they were taking the photos is to describe your journey through your graduate program. So they took photos and they also added a prompt and a description to that photo. Afterwards, we conducted semi-structured interviews. They were about 75 minutes long for most participants. And we asked them to identify their top pictures. Our next step, and we're currently in the process of completing this study, is to gather the women virtually, try to get as many as we can, which we may have to break them down into a couple of groups because we do have women on different coasts and time zones. But we're going to gather them for a focus group interview and discussion where they will share their photos, share their experiences, and we will continue to solidify the themes that have emerged from the data. Just a little bit about Photovoice, because oftentimes when I present this study, a lot of people are interested to know more about Photovoice. It is a method, qualitative method, that combines photos and words generated by the participants. It was developed about 3 decades ago by Wang and Burris. It's used worldwide. They have conferences all over for Photovoice. In fact, I presented this work at one of the conferences last year. But the big thing about it is used for many disciplines, but it's primarily focused on bringing change, working with communities to bring change, advocacy, and social justice. So we felt this is very fitting for this study because we're definitely trying to advocate for change in these programs. It is a participatory method. We don't limit the participants to just participants. For the study today, or for the presentation today, I'll use the words participants, but when we are engaging with the participants, we let them know that they are co-researchers. We are working together. And they become co-researchers because they are actually the ones who gather the data, their photos, and they have the privilege of explaining in their own voices, using their own narrative, what their experience is like and why they chose that photo to represent it. And again, it's just really the core component is focusing on advocacy. Um, it is traditionally done in person, but due to the fact that we had such a broad spectrum of states that we were working with people in, we did use it in online. Another thing is that there are 3 goals when you do the photo voice method. You want to record and reflect community strength and advocacy. We want to promote a critical discussion about the root causes of whatever issue it is that we're advocating for. And we want to inform decision makers. We ask them questions in the interviews like, what would you tell the people in your department or the people you feel that could make the changes to better support Black women? What suggestions do you have? And so the power for the voice is just not in the local images that they capture, but it's also in through the analysis, the interpretation, the captions. And I'll show you some examples of how we use this method and some of the quotes that we got from some of the participants. Real quickly on the data analysis, we took the transcripts from the interviews. Initially, we decoded them and took out any identifying information so that the participants could remain anonymous. We also reformatted them just based on the way that they initially came from the Zoom interviews. We also put those transcripts into the deduce software, but the initial interview we all worked on by hand together, and there are 4 researchers in the group. Each of us individually created a list of themes that we saw coming from the interviews, and then we compared those things for inter-rater reliability. After we've uploaded it into Deduce, we are going to compare the quotes that we match to the codes for member checking. Also, for my specific work with the stereotypes, I created a second Deduce file where I have created a code book for the stereotypes. I'm matching the excerpts to the stereotypes, and I'm going to have another researcher to do member checking on those excerpts and those codes as well. The framework that we worked with is CRT, and I'm not going to get too far into the framework. Many of you are familiar with the CRT or the critical race theory framework. But I do want to say that much of the misunderstanding that I believe many have about CRT revolves around the belief that it is in some way trying to explain the racist acts or discriminatory acts that have taken place, especially in this case in the graduate programs. But contrarily, critical race theory is really to highlight how systems and processes and institutions in America kind of began racist, how they're rooted in these historical legacies like slavery and segregation, and how it takes a deliberate effort to uproot those ideologies. And this is one of the reasons why I chose to use the CRT framework for this study, because a lot of the experiences could be traced back to the stereotypes, which we know these stereotypes also could be traced back in history to slavery. And so it is important to note that CRT is not any type of diversity and inclusion training. It's strictly to examine the roles that race plays in our society. It began in the legal academy, and it is not a personal attack on any group or individual. using CRT to do this work is not in any way to personally attack the physics community or any physics programs in particular. And when you think of it in that way, it diminishes its potential impact on being able to really challenge and transform a lot of these deeply ingrained processes and systems. And so it's just simply a tool to kind of create meaningful discussions about race and inequality in society. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. Okay, so here we get into a little bit more of the dissertation work that I'm working on and still in work. And so I wanted to start out by listing some of the commonly held stereotypes that people have about Black women. Primarily, we get a lot of these from the media. We get a lot of these from movies and television shows, but we also must remember that we do still have a generation or generations, boomers and beyond, of uh, people in America who have lived during the times when America was still segregated to some degree. And because of that, sometimes they tend to hold more stereotypes just because maybe they were raised in households or their parents were raised in households where Black women were still holding some of these stereotypical roles, for example, as caregivers or for housekeepers. And so that brings me to the first stereotype that we're going to look at, and that's the Mamie stereotype. The most important thing about the Mamie stereotype is it's not just that it depicts a Black woman as serving her white family, but it also says that she is happy. She is happy and content to be of service to her masters or her employers, even more so than her own family. She will put their needs above her own. We know that historically, um, there was a time when white women just did not want to breastfeed even their own babies. So they would hire, not hire as in paying them, but they would bring in Black women to nurse their babies. They called them wet nurses. And unfortunately, due to their requirement to nurse their slave masters' babies, a lot of Black children all at the same time went without. They had to be fed a solution of like, I think they would say powdered milk and dirty water because their mothers were indeed giving their breast milk to their slave masters. And so that's an extreme example to some people, but it's a reality of what happened. And it is those type of incidences and experiences that have allowed this Mamie stereotype to continue to infiltrate society and have some to believe that Black women are so caring and overly compassionate to the needs of others that they would put those their needs and the needs of their family before behind others. And so there's also this sapphire trope that we see a lot in movies. It's very comedic. It's funny to see a Black woman as being aggressive and loud and angry, rolling her eyes and you know, working her neck. This is something that we do see a lot, and it definitely affects the way that people view Black women, especially in positions of power or positions where they are uh, holding a more professional persona. And then we also know that there's the sapphire / angry Black woman that if you're like me, many Black women or try to steer away from, but it causes problems because a lot of times Black women will deny their own voices and needs because they don't want to come off as being an angry Black woman. So they don't complain, they don't speak out about injustices or the way they're being treated because they don't want to be perceived as this angry Black woman. So it's very problematic. And then the strong Black woman is just as problematic because we have taken this to be a positive thing when really it can be just as negative because it's saying that you're going to hold back your emotions. You don't want to appear weak. You have to always be strong and independent, and be responsible for the problems of others. And we know that's just not a healthy lifestyle to have. And finally, I added this one because a lot of the participants spoke about their experiences in their programs dealing with their exams, so the qualifying exams. And so a lot of people, believe that Black women are not intellectually adept and able to keep up with others. They perform poorly on high stakes exams. And research has come out to show that really the case is that Black women often experience stereotype threat during tests, and that can cause anxiety. So I'm going to kind of run through some of these examples because I don't want to run out of time. But here I'm talking a little bit about the Mamie stereotype, and I bring this up because there's this newspaper article that I included in my dissertation from 1918 that shows that there was a time when Black women had began to stay home and take care of their families, but because some of the white families did not want to uh, take on full responsibility for taking care of their home and their children, they were requiring that Black women come back to work. So this basically says, and I don't know if you can read it, but because some of the Black women were actually getting a monthly allowance from the government because their husbands were off in war. They were deciding to stay at home and raise their children, but they decided that they needed them to come back to work. And so they put this ordinance out saying that they needed to, indeed, put down their families and whatever they were doing and go back to work for their white women, for their white families. And again, with the strong Black woman, I wanted to show Michelle Obama because a lot of people look at her as the epitome of a strong Black woman, including Oprah, Beyonce, Serena. We have all these positive women that we idolize this strong Black woman stereotype from. But I just wanted to note that in a 2020 memoir that was written by one of the Secret Service agents that was with Michelle Obama, she stated that she really believed that the level of ridicule and racism that Michelle Obama had to be subject to was unprecedented compared to any of her predecessors. So even though we see her as this strong Black woman, we also know that in spite of her intellect, her intelligence, despite of her uh, ability to, speak well and obtain this level of respect amongst Black women and in society as the First Lady, she still faced the same amount or more, I'm sorry, racism and discrimination, and just was totally ridiculed, more so than any other First Lady. But this also says that if this woman of this position could be subject to these racialized experiences, then who are we as Black women in physics or Black women in general not to expect in some way, form, or fashion the same type of treatment? And so I give here an example from the data where one of the researchers, Atunu, asked, why do you think this picture needed to be captured? And in this picture, she's showing where she was using these items to help her to just deal with some of the emotional and mental issues that she was dealing with in her graduate program. And if you read the response, it says, where's the break for Black women in physics? Because even after you get the PhD, even after you get the job, if you do go into academia, there feels like there's no break. And then she goes on to talk about how after that, you got to try to get tenure. And we know the statistics on Black women getting tenure. And then you deal with racism on your job. And she's just saying, I think when I hear people say, like, just be strong, I'm like, be strong to what end? When do we rest? Or when we gonna rest is what she said. So again, this idolation of the strong Black woman, and a lot of the participants, we could hear experiences where they were going through things and they would seek advice from others who would say, stick through it, you can handle it. But the question is, how long are we going to be put in these positions where we have to be subject to this um, persona, where we have to always put up this facade of being strong to get through and to make it? And so that is one of the things that we hope coming out of this study, that we will be able to bring a light or highlight the fact that, being strong is not always feasible. And it definitely does not help to make your grad school experience any easier when you have all the other responsibilities of your studies. As far as the angry Black woman, this is a picture of someone who was in a study group. And the thing that I really love about the Photovoice method is that initially, when they took the picture, they had one thought about it, but as we began to delve in deeper and ask more questions about the photo, so much more comes out. And so this is one of those instances where the participant thought she was just showing a picture of her studying for some physics content in a graduate office. And I asked, how does this relate to Black women in physics graduate programs? I'm sorry, my computer must have defaulted to business, but we know it's physics graduate programs. And so the participant said, I think it's hard for Black women because having a study group is hard to find. When I first came to graduate school, uh, somebody would wanted to approach her about studying, they said, but they told her that they didn't because she looked unapproachable. And the participant is saying it's really tiring to try to not look unapproachable, because she literally goes in now and tries to put on a face, a mask, to appear more approachable so that people don't think that she's mean and try to exclude her from things. But that's really exhausting. And not just for her, but for many of the participants, they felt the need when they go into their grad programs to put on the mask, to fit in, to make it through. And that extra labor that comes with constantly having to do what we call code switching. And that code switching is not just in the form of your language, but code switching your personality, code switching your appearance, code switching your facial expression, change anything that you have to change to fit in can be exhausting. And it just adds to the list of things that Black women in physics PhD programs have to contend with, and the burdens that they have to carry outside of just being able to come to class and learn. And so that's one of the biggest takeaways that I would hope that you would gain from here, is that, again, PhD programs are challenging for everyone, but I want you all to understand that for Black women, because of the multiple identities that we have, because of the extra work that we have to do to be able to create some comfortability for us in these programs, um, it creates a lot of uh, extra cognitive load, extra emotional load, mental load, and sometimes even physical load, just being in those present in those places that other students don't have to contend with. And then I'm going to end here. I have a lot more that I could cover, but I'm not going to cover it all today. But hopefully I will be presenting more of my work later on through other avenues. And if you're interested in hearing about that, you can reach out to me. I'll give my email at the end. But when we talk about this intellectual inferiority, a lot of the times, Black women in physics programs are encouraged to master out if the program doesn't feel like they're up to par academically. And so in this case, the participant was asked about this picture here, and this picture on the right was outside of the window. And actually, this was a picture, a good picture. She was very grateful to finally have an apartment where she could have a window, because when she first entered her program, she had to get an apartment that had no windows. In her particular program, they did not offer any support for incoming students in the way of helping them find housing, financially getting set up, and that was a real deficit. So when she was able to finally get an apartment with a window, she was very excited. But through this photo, she began to think a lot about how she sat in that room alone and was very isolated throughout her time in her program. And when they asked, um, how does this lead to Black women in physics? This leads to Black women in physics graduate programs. She said that it just made her think about how people were constantly trying to get her to leave. They wanted her to just drop out. They would tell her that she doesn't need to take this class or do this thing because she was getting just a master's, and she would have to keep telling them, I'm not getting a master's, I'm getting a PhD. And so after a while, it kind of wore on her. And, obviously it was just mentally exhausting. One of the last things I want to point out is how a lot of the turmoils that she faced in her department was because people would say they wanted diversity, but she felt like they didn't, because they would say things to her like, we can't teach a student like you. And so what she took away from that is that they didn't want diversity. They wanted students who already came in knowing. They didn't want students who, I'm sorry, to go back, students who didn't have it already together. And so for a lot of Black students who come in, they're struggling to be there. But she was noting that even if they can't kick you out, they'll find ways to make you leave so that it doesn't look bad on them. And so I'm coming to the end of my time. So I'm going to go through some of these. I'm sorry. And I'm going to just go maybe to one of these on isolation because it's the one that I would like to leave with. And I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, but this is one of my favorite photos that we received. And actually, I went ahead and put the pseudo name for this participant. But basically, we wanted her to describe this photo. And I think this is a good note to leave on. And she says, you put this Black woman who came from a very different educational background in this white space, and you say thrive. And when they don't, you ask, what's wrong with you? And then she states, nothing's wrong with me, it's my environment. And this is what my environment feels like. It's cold, it's dead, it's not welcoming, but I'm here. And that's kind of what this photo is representing, as her being the single occupant in this large lecture hall. And so as she concludes, she says, in this photo, she's waiting for the next person to join her, so she's not alone. I'm waiting for the next Black woman to come, to sit next to me, to do this with me so I'm not by myself. And right now, she doesn't have that. Unfortunately, statistical wise, even if there's more than one Black woman in the program, both of them won't get their PhDs because one will get pushed out. And so you kind of have to deal with that, because if they don't push you out, they'll make it so unbearable that you choose to leave. And so I'm going to end there. This is my email if you have any additional questions, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I think
Yeah, if people
about
can
10
put
minutes.
questions in the Q&A, that would be great. And I will read them aloud unless Stephen gets to them first. Mm. So my first, I have a question, Camille.
Okay, great.
So somebody had asked a question, will you make your slides available?
I can do that. I can send them through NSBP, or yeah, I guess that would be the most feasible thing, to send them back through NSBP and have them post, or have a link when you get the recording. I'll also have an attachment that you can open the slides.
And there are some other mostly comments. Someone thanked you for being willing to tell I think the attendee must be a Black woman their stories. And somebody would like your email address again.
Okay. And it's just going to be Camille.coffie, and I'll put it in the chat at gmail.com. Any general questions about the study or even PR before we log off?
We do have a question. How does the conversation between the researchers and the participants affect the Photovoice approach?
Okay, good question. So, and I didn't get to get into it as much, but with the photo voice method, we're using what they call the showed approach, which is a series of questions that we ask about every photo. So you go through the photos one by one and you ask these set of 4 questions. One of them has to do with number one, tell us what this photo, what is this photo? What is it literally? What do you see in this photo? Another one of the questions is, how does this photo relate to your experience in your program? And then another question is like, how does this photo relate to Black women in physics PhD programs? So we have those series of questions that we ask for each photo. And a lot of the times it seems redundant, but once we get through the photos, you find that as the participants begin to discuss the photos, like I said, things that they didn't see up front and in the beginning, as they are telling their story and sharing their experience related to that photo, a lot more information comes out.
Thank you. Are there specific ways that have been researched to make physics PhDs more comfortable for Black women?
That's what we're working on. So there has not been a lot of research at all for Black women. A lot of the research as far as physics is for women of color, which is inclusive of all women. And that's a wonderful thing. But the real reason and problem is that we don't have enough women who are pursuing PhDs in physics for people to want to fund the research. And so it's like a, what do you call it? Not like a revolving door, but what's happening is there's not enough Black women pursuing PhDs for people to want to invest in the research. But then there's not enough research because it keeps circling around. So, but we are getting more Black women now probably than ever I've seen who are currently in physics PhD programs. So I hope that we can work with National Society of Black Physicists and do everything that we can. Also work with, like I said, Dr. Jamie Valentine Miller in keeping up with these women, keeping networks and support groups available so that we can retain these women and hopefully increase the numbers.
Great. And are there some things faculty can do, particularly for undergraduate students at HBCUs to prepare the students outside of physics knowledge heading to grad school?
Definitely. I think one of the primary things that any faculty member can do that they think is so small is to just help promote that physics identity by encouraging them in ways that maybe you don't think is important, but it is. So because we do have a lot of Black women, and this is just something that came up in the interviews as well, who don't feel as confident in their math skills. That's one of the reasons a lot of them also are hesitant to pursue physics because they think they have to be math, um, very intellectually strong in their mathematics. And while there is a large component of physics that is mathematics, it's not something that's not something that they can get to, and that's not easily comprehensible for them. They just need someone to be supportive and understanding that they need that additional support in that area. So as a faculty member, I think it would be very helpful to always promote a good, healthy physics identity by letting them know that they're capable, more than capable of doing the work, that you're there to support them and assist them in any way that you can. Also, as far as going on to grad school, to always encourage them to do so. Even if they may not be in your eyes the strongest student or the strongest student in your course, does not mean that they don't have the ability to gain the knowledge that they need to so that they can succeed in a graduate program. Because there are a lot of challenges that students endure in undergrad that may change and be different in grad school. A lot of the participants underwent a lot of drastic things in undergrad that affected their academics. but it didn't reflect on their intellect. It was just something that they went through for that time. And so what a student looks like in undergrad can be totally different from what they look like in grad school, and that's something to remember.
Right, I think that's a good point. We're all changing in different ways. And what has been the most surprising theme you found or coded?
Y'all know what? I'm a Black woman, so I'm gonna just go over here with y'all. It has been the amount of discussion around hair. Like, I have done lots of studies with students with disabilities and talking about, and I asked my advisor just last week, Dr. Chitty, who is a white woman, I asked her, I said, out of your years of interviewing students in higher education as it relates to physics, especially women, do you recall having these many experiences with hair? And or discussions about hair, and she stated no. And I'm like, I think it's primarily because the hair in a lot of the interviews was not just symbolic of like grooming, but for Black women, number one, hair is a very significant issue. We know this. But even more importantly, it was a big source of the code switching. So we had so many discussions about why and how they braid their hair during this time of year because they don't want the microaggressions that come sometimes with hair where people want to touch your hair. They want to ask you, what did you do to your hair? And they felt like it was a distraction sometimes. People would come to them and be asking about their hair and not concerned about their work. And so that was one part of the hair thing. Another part is we had a participant who had to do her research in a clean room, and you have to put on a hat. She wears her hair typically in her natural state. It's an afro curly fro, but when she went in the clean room, she would have to braid her hair down because the hats wouldn't fit over. And I felt it was so poignant because she mentioned how it made her realize that no one had given thought about how one day a Black woman might be at this university entering this clean room and would need equipment that accommodated her hair, her crown. And perhaps it had never been thought about because from the beginning, people just assumed that Black women would not even be interested or able at some point to go into the field of physics. So now that things are changing, we as faculty and also administrators do need to start thinking about these minor things that make people feel included, make them have a sense of belonging. Just imagine if you walked into your clean room and there were, head coverings specifically for Black women or people who have their natural hair. That would be comforting to know that someone thought that little step, about you. So things like that came up a lot about hair, just its relation to how they're treated in the department or how it affects their learning experience.
Right, and we have time for two questions, and then we'll try and transition to time maybe that people can just ask questions off the recording. So our final two questions. Has this study touched on the transition from HBCUs to PWI, predominantly white graduate programs?
Inadvertently, it has. That wasn't something that we really thought about in the beginning, but because we do have several participants, including myself, who come from HBCUs transitioning to PWIs, we have had lots of experiences reported through these interviews where the participants discussed the difficulty in making that transition. And I think the last slide, she alluded to that as well. People not understand that when you're going from this HBCU environment where you're very supported, you feel a very big sense of belonging, and now you're placed at this PWI for your grad studies, there's a very hard transition there to get used to. And myself, like I went to Spelman. Spelman is known as, one of the primary producers of Black women who get PhDs in STEM. Um, but those Black women got to go out now into these PWIs mostly to pursue these PhDs. And there's definitely some research that needs to be done in that way. Like I said earlier, we just don't have a lot of Black women, well, we don't have a lot of research being done on Black women, and we don't have a lot of Black women in PER. So there's two issues there who want to pay attention to those issues. But yeah, that definitely came up in the interviews, and it's definitely something that is worth researching further.
Great, thank you. And our final question is, What are some words of affirmation you can provide for Black women students today?
Words of affirmation I would give you is that you are just as capable, just as intelligent, just as brilliant as anyone else. And it shows, rings true by looking at the journey that your grandmothers and great grandmothers and ancestors came through and how hard they fought to get an education, how they used the resources that they had to learn to read and write. And so that same strength that they hold is in you. And so just rely on that strength, build on that strength, stand on their shoulders, and get it done.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Camille. We are at top of the hour because everybody's in different time zones.
Mhm.
Can you stop the recording? Because I wanted to give some time in case folks wanted to ask questions off the recording.
Okay.